As Ambassador Haley focuses on Iran, the U.S. is still grappling with North Korea's nuclear weapons program. And we just learned a short time ago that Kim Jong-un's regime launched yet another apparent weapons test on Friday. 3 short-range missiles that the Pentagon says pose no risk to the U.S. territory of Guam. And now we're also learning that pressure on Egypt may help the U.S. deal with North Korea. Recently, the U.S. State Department announced they were going to withhold $300 million in aid to Egypt over its human rights record. Analysts say, though, it's an indirect way of targeting North Korea. Now, Egypt's ties to North Korea date back to the 1970s, when North Korean pilots helped train Egyptian fighter pilots before its 1973 war with Israel. So to help break all of this down, let's turn to Craig Snyder, President and CEO for the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia. Craig, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, first let's talk about this connection between Egypt and North Korea. How significant and solid is this relationship?
Well, it's usually described as a cozy relationship. Look, the North Koreans don't have a lot of ways or a lot of places in the world that they can generate the money that they need for these expensive weapons development programs. Their economy is very small and very weak. So they take their opportunities where they can get them. And Egypt has been one of those places where they've been able to engage in military arms sales and perhaps a whole range of illegal, prohibited international economic activity in terms of the sanctions imposed by the UN. So it's been a friendly port in a storm for the North Koreans.
No doubt the U.S. is sending a message to Egypt by withholding this aid. Do you think the move is part of an overall strategy to try and squeeze North Korea?
Really remains to be seen, but I'll tell you, the State Department's official explanation for this slowing down of the aid, the sort of pause in the aid to Egypt, being about human rights, it just doesn't ring true. President Sisi came to Washington, met with President Trump not that long ago, and was lavishly praised by the president. And indeed, President Trump has a record now of lavishing praise on other autocrats, from Erdogan in Turkey to Putin in Russia to Duarte in the Philippines, who engage in human rights abuses. And in terms of the calculus about human rights and U.S. relations with Egypt, even President Obama's administration, which started off with a great fanfare, the famous Cairo speech in 2009, pledging the United States toward human rights in the Arab world, even the Obama administration concluded that a more stable Egypt was more important to the United States than a more free Egypt. So it really doesn't ring true that this would be about human rights. The North Korean explanation at first sort of sounds far-fetched, but it's actually the more plausible explanation. As to whether they're going to do it in other parts of the world, it's hard to say. And as to whether it could be effective against North Korea is also hard to say.
So are there other sort of cozy relationships that North Korea has similar to what it has with Egypt, beyond China, of course?
Yeah, well, yes. The other most important one is Russia. There's a significant amount of trade and economic activity going on with Russia, which is also a neighboring state. What I'd want to point out, though, is that as with all policy options towards North Korea, this sort of secondary sanctions approach, trying to limit economic activity going on outside North Korea, is dangerous because it's unlikely to result in the collapse of the North Korean regime, but it may further wound and scare the North Korean regime. And frankly, the most dangerous part of the North Koreans possessing nuclear weapons is not that they develop them in order to deter attack, that they develop them in order to ensure the survival of the regime. The most dangerous part is if they ever come to feel that that regime is really under threat, including the threat of economic collapse, then they might be tempted to use them, a kind of preemptive retribution. You know, I'm going to take as many with me as I can, is not an impossible thought on the mind of the North Korean leadership. So that's really the worry, I think, that this strategy poses. But as I say, every option towards North Korea leads to potential places of danger.
Okay, so we know that North Korea demonstrated last month that it can reach the United States with a long-range missile, which is disconcerting, as you're pointing out. And at this point, what other recourse does the U.S. have to deal with this escalating issue? We are now just reporting today from the South Korean military that yet another potential weapons test, especially when it seems like China is not helping much. What is the next move of recourse for the United States?
Well, look, there's going to be continued efforts. This move in Egypt appears to be one of them, to bring greater pressure on the North Koreans. They're not going to, in my view, ever negotiate away their nuclear weapons. But they might be persuaded to negotiate away further development of the technologies to deploy those weapons against the United States. It's possible that that might
Craig, do you think that the United States... do you think the United States needs to take military action?
My own personal view is that there are really only two actual kind of categories of choices here. One is preemptive military action, which is dangerous and would provoke widespread suffering. That's one possibility. The other possibility is acceptance of North Korea as a nuclear state, the way we've accepted Russia and China and India and others, and the notion that we've applied to those other countries that we can deter them from using those weapons against us or our allies by the threat of massive retaliation. So it is possible that we may come to the conclusion, even though other presidents, several presidents now have said this would never be the policy of the United States, we may well be in a situation where the lesser of the two evils is to accept the North Korean nuclear threat while trying to contain it and deter it.
All right. Thank you so much, Craig Snyder. Thank you for your insight.